Well, good day, everyone. This is Fred Schenkelberg, and welcome to today's Ascendo Reliability webinar. And we're going to be talking about MTBF. And those of you that have seen or heard me speak before, you know I have little use for MTBF, and often have gotten the question of, well, what do you do instead? You know, what are the alternatives? So as we get into this, and I got a few more people logging in, and Samuel's come up with a comment over in the comment section that they use MTBF. So hopefully, Sam, this is really aimed at you, is to say, have you think about this metric and what it really does for you. So hopefully that'll pan out for you. And at least, if nothing else, give you a few more things to think about as you explore improving your program and your plant. All right, so let me just double check, make sure everybody can hear me all right. If I could get a quick comment or two that it's working. All right, Franek, it's working. And Jim, let's see, looks like it's loud and clear. I got one person that's not working. There's a has the number. There's a little, if you need to dial in, there's a little blue icon, little I blue that has the phone number in it. But if I just say that, Jim won't be able to hear me since that's not working. And the other common way to do it is log out, then back in. So hopefully that'll work. In Bangalore, appreciate staying up late. I believe it's probably late into the evening there if I got the time zones right. So appreciate you joining us. I know we have people from all over the world. There's a good number of folks that I've seen before here. Alan and Angel and David Faranak. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing some of these names right, but appreciate everybody joining in. And well, let's dive right into the topic. There's I think, going to be an interesting discussion, and I look forward to you continuing to use the chat window. And if you've got a particular question you don't want me to miss, please put that in the Q&A tab. It's just to the right, but I'll be watching the chat window as best I can. I'm also experimenting with a new platform to present the slides in, and one of the features of this is that there's live links within the presentation. And so hopefully that'll, if you click on the reliability.fm icon, that should open a browser window going to the site reliability.fm, which is, I didn't want to forget, is a new podcast network. And so Dare to Know is a series of interviews. Tim Rogers interviews quality and reliability thought and get some insight in a relatively short interview as to what's driving them, what is behind them writing a book or teaching or being a consultant, and just a little insight into the personalities that are a big part of our industry. And so check that show out. It comes out twice a month, and we're actively looking for people to interview and having a great time doing that because there's a lot of great thought leaders in our industry. Speaking of reliability, is more of a conversation type show, and we're talking about a wide range of different reliability topics, from supply chain type topics, working with suppliers, and the issue today that came out was on what happens when you're only focused on cost in working with your suppliers. And Kirk, the link didn't work for you. All right, well, you know, that's what I was hoping to do, is just test it out and see if it worked or not. And I guess I'll try something else next time. And then the last icon there, the sun and the moon, is the recordings for these webinars. And so I think we've got close to 15, 16 of them posted now, and you can get them through iTunes or Stitcher or a variety of other platforms that offer podcasts. So Each of these are interesting projects. We're having a great time. And Kirk, who just commented, is part of the Speaking of Reliability one. Kirk and I have had some wonderful discussions about halt testing and just testing in general. Also talking to a handful of other folks of everything from reliability engineering management to supply chain type stuff. So give them a listen, let us know, and if you like them, please add a comment or review. If you don't like them, send me an email and we'll see what we can do to make it better. But either way, let us know. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on these. All right. So in reliability, whether we're in asset management and say a process industry or in product development or say a consumer product or an industrial product, we need to deal with measuring reliability. Just how the customer just wants it to work, whether it's a new pump in your factory or a smartwatch, for example. When we fire it up, we expect it to perform and not fail over some period of time. And that's what we call reliability. It's a reliable device or a reliable product. Now, there's lots and lots of ways to measure reliability, and some are more common than others, and some are more useful than others. So that's what we really want to get after in today's presentation is what is this about that allows us to get after what we're doing as reliability professionals and make it useful for the rest of our organization. So, but we don't just measure it for no apparent reason or just because. Now, if you do, you might want to start asking some other questions. But these elements of what we're measuring, whether it's uptime in our factory or customer satisfaction, eventually in the product's performance over time, is that we're trying to make some decisions as to whether our product is ready for market or not, whether we're going to be profitable or not, say when we're making the decision to develop a product or to purchase a product. Will it work and give us the return on investment we expect? Now, consumers may not be thinking of return on an investment in MBA type terms, but they certainly want their product to work and give them the value that they are expecting from it. So that's a form of a decision. If I'm buying new equipment, say a set of spares from a new vendor, I really want those products to work as expected within my system and continue to work. Now, if I'm monitoring, say, an assembly line or a production facility or a solar power plant, availability or uptime is often more important, and reliability is just one aspect of those measurements. So when we gather this information, we're trying to make decisions or support people that are trying to make decisions. How many spares should I bring in? What kind of maintenance schedule is working or not working? And are we going to be able to afford our warranty expenses if we're shipping a product out? And vice versa, people are trying to make decisions, is this the right product for me? So if we came out with a brand new laptop and said it would last at least a week and no guarantee after that, well, it would probably not sell very well once that became known that that's all you were going to warranty it for. Whereas other products that are getting a 5-year warranty in that market space are getting a little bit more attention and a little more buy-in to, pardon the pun, that the product is actually good. And there's a bunch of nuances to how you advertise and how this buying decision occurs, yet we're usually focused on creating metrics to help us make decisions in a grand sense and in reliability in particular. So the idea is let's use a good metric. MTBF, mean time between failure, or mean time to failure, if you want to use the repairable system acronym. And I vaguely remember that there's literally thousands of MT something, MT between unscheduled removal for the aircraft industry, and on and on and on. There's all kinds of variations of these, but they're all essentially the same in that you take the total time that your system or units are operating and divide by failures. and it gives you the average time to failure. And that's not very difficult to work with or understand or manipulate. But it's also not terribly useful if you want to actually make decisions. That's what I really want to get after. So just a quick either show of hands. Let's do a show of hands. Up on the top of your screen, there should be a little person with his hand up. How many of you use MTBF regularly? Well, let's see. I think I actually have a poll here. So I got Meryl, Dennis. Yeah, getting a bunch of hands. Not as many as I expected. There we go. Yeah, it looks like quite a few people. All right. Unfortunately, you know where I'm coming from on that, but we'll see if I can open that up a little bit for you. Yeah. And Jeff, you say etc. What else do you use besides MTBF? RAS analysis, reliability, availability, safety. I'm not sure what RAS stands for. MTTB. I'm not sure what that is. MTBMA, is that maintenance activities? No longer using it, thanks to Fred. Appreciate that, Gene. And hopefully you're seeing some, and so B is breakdown. Okay, another fancy word for failure. But it's probably defined as a particular type of downtime. Mean time to repair. Now, mean time to repair is not too bad, especially if you're using a log normal distribution to focus on it. All right, let's take a look at a poll. I forgot I pulled this thing together, no pun intended. So how often do you use MTBF in your day-to-day work and in activities and so on? Right, some people after my own heart are saying never. That's excellent. And are you able to see the poll? Let's see, I'm not showing my screen here, but it looks like monthly's winning, very close with never. All right. Right. Looks like about close to 30% never and about 40% monthly, and then tapered on down to almost 20% are using this daily. So let me bring back the presentation. Yeah, I've heard it over and over and over again that MTBF is common. But is it working for you? And so let's take a look at really briefly why I think MTBF is bad. So some of you may have heard that it's some years ago I did a presentation at a conference where I simply asked how many of you have had to explain what is MTBF and how it should be used. And everybody raised their hand. There's a bunch of reliability engineers in the room. And I'm sure you've seen the similar thing, is that some people believe it's a failure-free period, or they think that that's equivalent to the duration over which it should not fail, saying the same thing. Or that MTBF in and of itself, just that number, 50,000 hour MTBF, is the full description of the item's reliability. Well, not really, and you know that. I mean, the people on this line probably know that pretty well. But the understanding is part of that communication that we have to deal with in our day-to-day work. If we say this pump has a 50,000 hour MTBF, and everybody thinks that it'll last for 5 years without failure, well, they may well be surprised. Now, is it even appropriate for a pump or a fan, for example, two classic examples that use MTBF as their metric, because they wear out, right? The bearings wear, or the pump and the motor and the other moving parts wear, and so they're classic wear out mechanisms, poster child type components. So I'm using a underlying assumption of a constant failure rate when I calculate or assume an exponential distribution, yet it's a gross misstatement to how it's really used. But more importantly, is how people think of it. It's an average failure rate, but does that mean that it's a normal distribution and a very small variance right around that 50,000 hour point? Um, Probably not. Yeah. So there's lots of other tools out there, and coupled with this basic fear is probably the right word of statistics. And Jim, I noticed your comment is that yes, there are other statistics out there, and they're not terribly difficult to understand. And part of it is, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is how we go about doing that. But you can see way better measures and metrics without losing a bunch of information. When we're dealing with reliability data, we're dealing with whether it's a motor in your factory, it has a time to failure element. Or if it's a large complex system, say a bottler for a liquid product you're putting into bottles, it's got tens of thousands of components, and it may go down every 10, 20 seconds for a jam or some sensor tripping and shutting it down. So it's quickly repaired and put back into service, yet if I lose that information about are the failures happening more or less frequently as we're operating, and we just do a grand average, we're losing information. Now, if I use the car I had when I was in high school, it was an old late model car. My dad got it mostly, I think, so that I would learn how to take care of a car because it had lots of opportunities to do repairs on it. If I would have taken that set of average downtime or calculated MTBF for it, I would have gotten a reasonable number. And over the 3-month period that I had this car, it would have been interesting to have tracked that and calculated a value. What we did notice, though, anecdotally, is that in that last month, I had way more things going wrong with it. I needed a muffler, I needed brakes, I needed a fuel pump, I needed a water pump. The cost of repairs was escalating quickly. Lots and lots of different things were wearing out. So at that point, my dad, with his experience, said, well, let's get rid of this car. It's in its wear out. Now, he didn't use those terms, but why rely on experience and anecdotal evidence when you can use the proper statistics to really get after knowing whether you're winning the game on maintenance or not, or is this product starting to wear out or not? Those kinds of things become part and parcel to what we do. So if you just use MTBF, you're going to miss the impact of those early failures. They're going to make your MTBF look way worse, and then over time it'll slowly look like it's getting better as you accumulate more hours and the number of failures decrease. Yet it's a crude, rough estimate of what's really going on when you probably really need to know what's the rate of decline of failures after a new system goes into service. You know, are the adjustments and is the maintenance I'm doing on a system actually helping or not? And MTBF by itself, even if I track it on a day-to-day basis, is just a very crude and often misleading metric as to what's really happening. Just do the analysis yourself. Is set up a spreadsheet and have 10 out of 100 failures the first day and 5 out of 100 failures the second day and so on. So you have this classic decreasing failure rate, and using MTBF, see what you get. You probably will lead you to making the wrong decision. And then the same on the other end is that the wear outs, if you've got say 100 motors in a system and they all are starting to wear out at say 2,000 hours, you're going to look absolutely wonderful for the first 1,900 hours with very few, if any, failures. And by the time you notice that you have a class defect on your hands, you're going to be down. You're not going to have enough spares. You're not going to understand what's going on. So a lot of what we do is working on, well, what's the failure mechanism? What's the nature of the failures? What's the root cause of this and so on? Well, that is coupled with, is it wearing out? Is it an infant mortality? Is it a design error? All those kinds of things lead us to whether it's likely to be an infant mortality or likely to be a wear out mechanism. Now, in my experience, there's very, very few systems that actually show up as an exponential distribution or a constant failure rate, where the typical use of MTBF is applied. So most often, we're just using a gross average when we really need to be using some better statistics and some better tools to look at what's going on. So, yeah, MTBF groupthink. Yeah, the effects of censoring. It's there, Jim, I just don't know why. And I often joke that it was our undergraduate statistics class that kind of scared most engineers away from diving into reliability statistics. Yet a simple graph oftentimes is all you need to help people get out of this MTBF groupthink and to get past what's really going on. Plot the data. I've written about that many times in the past, but just describe the data in a plot and show them what it is. Now, if you're dealing with say, motors or pump or items that you typically just replace in your factory, or like the fuel pump on my car, it was just replaced. It may or may not have been repaired and put back into service, but that wasn't my business. Or I'm dealing with a consumer product, for example, or a product that is replaced under a warranty type situation. Well, then reliability is really the right number. What we're really interested in. When somebody says, yeah, Bart, I'm going to quote you on that. I might just have to cut and paste that into a tweet. But what happens when you say that? When you say it's not an actionable info, what kind of response do you get? And we'll tap into that in a few minutes. So reliability, as you know, it's defined on page 1 of most reliability engineering textbooks of one sort or another. It's a function that operates within an environment, has a probability of successfully operating over a duration. Whether it's Iris, Coombs, and Moss in Reliability Engineering and Management Handbook, or in the Patrick O'Connor and Andre Kleiner's 5th edition of Practical Reliability Engineering, or pick your favorite reference. We usually define reliability for us engineer types with these 4 functions. So what's going to fail? How will we know if it's failed or not? Where do we expect it to be used? And then this set of couplets, probability and duration. How many should last a month? How many should last a year? How many should last 10 years? What's the chance that this unit will survive long enough? Now, that's not hard to use or articulate. Say for a cell phone. The primary function is to make and receive calls, although my cell phone's used more often to browse the web or get up on Twitter, it seems like. Outdoor, portable, anywhere in the world, well, most anywhere that there's cell coverage. And even in the mountains in Nepal, there's cell coverage, and so that was outdoor, portable to another degree. And I want 98% to survive 2 years. Now, I may want 99.5% to survive 3 months, say that early life period, and I may want 95% to survive 5 years. There's no reason you have to limit the number of couplets for the last part of it. And they don't have to line up with any particular distribution. So what I'm really looking at here is that the reliability definition, if you're setting a goal, is usually well documented as the set of functions in the environment in a product requirements document. But then let's add the connections to your business. What affects your customer satisfaction? That's early life area, the first month or first 3 months of something. So let's set a goal that helps us to achieve higher customer satisfaction. And then the warranty period oftentimes is the next milestone, and it's important to your business. How much do you expect to spend on warranty, and set a percentage surviving there? It's easy to calculate if you know the cost of failure. And then how long should this last? Is it a 5-year product, a 10-year product, 20-year product? And then what proportion of your product should last that long? So there's no quibbling with this. There's no underlying distribution. There's no misunderstanding of what it means. If I ship 100 cell phones, 98 should still be working in 2 years. Pretty basic, right? Now this works great for a product that is like a cell phone or a discrete motor or something like that. But let's take a look at if I would have assumed an MTBF for this. And this is where this plot the data thing comes in. So let me see if I can get my drawing piece up here. All right, and well, and marker, there we go. So this red line is assuming an exponential fit to this data. So what I did is I took 5 data points out of 100 systems, and let's say I had 100 motors and 5 of them failed. And so this first one failed at, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4,000, 4,500 hours, something like that, and so on. Each one failed at a particular time. Now I had no failures before this first one, so for the first 2,000, 3,000 hours, these systems were running really well. And then they started to fail. Now I've had 5 out of 100 in my plant fail, and I could divide the total time that all these things were running by the 5 failures, and I could plot that as an exponential curve. The slope of this is 1 on this, it's a Weibull cumulative distribution plot, which time on the horizontal axis in log, and the unreliability also in the log scale on the vertical scale. So this is the point when 10% of the units have failed. According to MTBF, I've got out to almost, say, 18,000 hours, almost 2 years or so before I would expect 10% of my units to fail. So I'm in no big rush to order more spares, to do any replacements, do anything else. Now, if I simply plot the data and just fit a straight line through it, don't even worry about whether it's Weibull or not. This log plot's a wonderful tool for straight lines. I would learn that I should expect closer to 30% of these motors to fail. Now, this, of course, assumes that the failure mechanism stays true, and this is describing a particular wear-out mechanism and all those things. But I can react to this difference in information either by doing preemptive replacements before we start experiencing all the downtime of all these motors over the next year, or stock up on spares and being able to replace them very quickly. But you see the difference, right? Early on, if I assumed an MTBF part, I have a much higher expected number of failures than I actually had. So for the first couple thousand hours, for the first 2, 3 months, I didn't have any failures. And my storeroom folks might be saying, why am I carrying these spares? Why do we have this extra equipment? When the MTBF would have driven you to order extra parts. So whether you're looking for the early time or the wear out mechanisms or whatever, just plot the data. Right? Come on. We can use reliability in setting goals, and would this particular performance of this particular pump be appropriate or not? So if we're expecting to go less than, say, 1% failures at 10,000 hours, it's pretty clear that this pump or this motor, the set of data that we have, is showing failures much before our goals. And if I had different points on this curve at different couplets of reliability at different durations, I can very quickly and visually determine whether I'm there or not. Whereas oftentimes we don't even plot an MTBF value. We just give them a number, 50,000 hours MTBF. Now, is that really something we want to to, to have happen or not? So Bart and Salvador not seeing the slides. I wonder what's going on. Let me, there we go. All right, you got it. So anyway, a log plot, and in this particular one, I had some sensor data, so I'm using a YO++ to do it. There are lots of other packages. R is free and can do this. Excel can do it. There's stuff available online to show you how to do it. It's a bit tedious, but it can be done. But the idea is just plot the data, see where your failures are versus what you're actually calculating. And then if you're experiencing wear out or early life failures, you can see it, and then you can make appropriate decisions based on your data. So the idea here is, use reliability. Oftentimes, if we're talking about a particular product, we know the functions, we know the environment. It's usually well documented in a requirements document or in a data sheet. But the couplets of probability and duration, let's make those explicit. Instead of saying it's got a 5-year life, well, how many should survive 5 years? Or saying it's got it's a 5 nines reliable product, 99.999% chance of surviving. Well, over what duration? So in my mind, it always should be a couplet. Now, if you really want to throw your friends off that are hooked on MTBF, when they say it's a 50,000 hour MTBF device, ask them over what duration. Because the MTBF is an inverse failure rate. It's just a point on a curve, but it could be applied to just about any distribution or any period of time. So if I'm only tracking per day, then that's all it's valid for. If I'm tracking data over a year, it's useful over that time. But if you just say MTBF, what duration are you talking about? And those that are track MTBF regularly know that it continues to change. All right, real quick, one of the questions I got earlier this week from some of the folks that were signing up for the session was, and more than one asked me about it, well, what happens if I have a repairable system, whether it's a factory equipment in your plant, process equipment, or your car, or a solar field array system with panels and inverters and electrical systems and so on. What do we do? Because reliability works with things that I'm just replacing. MTTF is often the measure that we use for non-repairable systems. But let's say I've got a repairable system. Reliability is appropriate for the components on your repairable system, but not the system overall. So what's a better way of going after this? Well, one of the tools that I've run across over the years is called mean cumulative function. Wayne Nelson, if you go to the nomtbf.com site and search for Wayne Nelson, he's got a nice paper that he contributed that talks about calculating these mean cumulative functions and plotting those. Graphical analysis for repairable data, I think is the name of the paper. And there's, in the Tobias and Trindade's textbook, there's a whole chapter or two on this, and you can find a bunch of literature on this technique. But it really is, it's a non-parametric method. So if I've got the counts of failures on the vertical axis, oops, let me actually get my pen working. If I've got the counts of failures here, and I say I start up a system or a new, like let's use my car from high school, and time. So I first got the car and I'm running along and I ran for almost a month and I had my first failure. So it basically just put a point there, right? And the second month, I had my second failure, right? And then the failures started to occur a bit more often. And so if I'm going to space these out appropriately, I get let's see if I can change my color here, is what I get is what I'm anecdotally seeing is that I have this increasing rate of failure. Now I could calculate MTBF. I've had 6 failures over 3 months. And my car ran for 3 months. Every time it took just a couple of hours to get to repair. And in fact, I learned how to disconnect the fuel line and use the compressed air to blow it out. There was a bad filter in the gas tank that was getting clogged, and it was either sending debris down into my inline filter or it was clogging at the tank itself. And so blowing out the line gave me another couple 100 miles. Not exactly the most reliable of cars. And we ended up replacing the fuel tank altogether and pretty much replacing the entire fuel system all the way up into the engine in order to clean that all out. And so we got it in great shape, running really well, and we sold it. But by simply plotting the arrivals of the failures and just counting them, I get a curve that tells me that I have a wear out mechanism, that I have an increasing failure rate, that the maintenance I'm doing is not helping. Now, conversely, let me redraw my vertical scale here. If my points are giving me a curve that looks like that, what do you think that indicates? That over time, the arrival of failures is spacing out more and more often. The arrivals are getting spaced out. What does that mean? What does that indicate? Gives me a chance to grab a quick glass of water here. All right, now I've seen both answers here, improving system or infant mortality. Yeah, reliability has grown. So take a look at it. So I get my first failure here. Second failure comes pretty quick. Third failure, right? Then fourth failure takes longer for it to occur. Fifth failure takes even longer for it to occur. So the early repairs I'm doing or the early maintenance activity on the system tend to improve the system. Now, either I've had a handful of infant mortality type activities, and once they're resolved, those parts of the system just work better, or the adjustments or the alignment that I'm performing with the maintenance activities is making the system run more efficiently and less chance for breakdown. But if I have this falling over type curve, the system's getting better. The PM is working. It's actually improving the system. Conversely, if it's a curve that's moving steeper and steeper, what I'm doing is not working and or there's something fundamentally wearing out. Now, in some cases, it might just be a straight line and it may not really show much of a big difference overall, but it's just a graphic and it's really, really easy to interpret. I like to say even by managers. Right. So here's actual data. This was the cumulative number of failures over time, and it was about a year's worth of data. And this was actually for an escalator. And so the maintenance team was called out the technicians were called out when the building operator in the morning, one of the folks came around and turned the lights on and started up the escalators and opened the doors and things like that. And if it didn't work, they would call the technicians that were centrally located, and they would come out to the building and perform some maintenance. Now, because of that scenario, most calls were first thing in the morning, just before the rush hour or rush of traffic coming into the facility. And so the natural inclination, and this isn't unfamiliar to many of you that are doing plant operations, is we got to get it running, get it up and running. Let's make products, let's move people. Well, what happens here is this at about 4,000 hours, or 4,000 hours after, what is that, a couple of months, 2-3 months, they were called out repeatedly, almost every day, and sometimes twice a day, So this graphic just shows this vertical rise here. Something was fundamentally going wrong. And so the graph then triggered one of the supervisors to say, hey, something's not right here. Uh, let's fix it. So they sent out a team with the mandate to find what's underlying the problem. Don't just get it running. And it gave them a couple of weeks of performance, but that wasn't the true root cause of what was going on. And then they effected a major repair, had a small mishap at about 5,500 hours, and then it ran really nicely for almost 2,000 hours. But if you've got this graph, not just MTBF, you can see this occur much before. Let me get my pointer here. I'm waving my hands in front of the screen and realize that doesn't really work very well. But if I can see this uptick in calls to this piece of equipment, I can change my maintenance strategy. I can go do something different. Maybe come back during off hours and do a thorough inspection and maintenance routine on it. But the idea is to get it so that it gives us some time over which it works. And is what we're doing out there just restarting the system, which wasn't really fixing the problem. It was back out there the next day. It's job security for your technicians, but it's not really improving your reliability or the performance of your system or of your line. So the function line is a fitted line, and I'm using Weibull++, and they have a recurrent data analysis, RDA, module that then just basically does a simple regression to this thing. It reports it as a beta and eta, so it's similar to a Weibull distribution, but I don't think it's not exactly the same thing. And then it has this RF factor, which is correlated to how effective your repair systems are. So instead of being repaired as good as new or bad as old, where you replace one component and everything else is still likely to fail, which would be between 0 and 1 on this kind of a scale, it's saying that I'm about 30% effective in making repairs in this particular fitted line. So this RF factor here. So that's a little bit more advanced. I should probably talk about that in another realm. What I wanted to talk about is that if you've got just a straight line, then your maintenance is just holding steady on your system. It's not making it better or worse. Now this particular one was showing a slight improvement, and it's a very subtle curve to this thing, and that's where doing the analysis and doing a fitted curve helps a little bit with that. But there are episodes like here where I've got repeated failures or repeated calls, something's going on. But this was after we started looking at the graphs. So at this point, the technicians were alerted earlier that something was going wrong, implemented a more thorough fix, and then we got more duration out of this particular escalator. So I didn't use fancy statistics. I didn't do anything earth-shattering. I just said, let's plot the data, the number of failures versus time. And so as the technicians started to get used to these patterns, and it was easy to interpret, then they started taking different action based on what they were seeing. So if the system had a long history of running really well, let's take care of it quickly and move on. But if I'm making my third trip out there, let's do something different. So it meant the linear mean cumulative function. Yeah, so even when it's flat, Stephen, even if that curve is flat, it may, on these kinds of scales, MTBF may or may not be appropriate because it still may be a consistently decreasing failure rate or a consistently increasing failure rate, and it'll appear close to a straight line. It has to be pretty obvious one direction or the other to show the big curves, and that's where the little more detailed in the analysis comes in. But if you've got just a straight on dead slope of 1, then MTBF would work. Now, don't quote me there. I hate having it being said that I've agreed that MTBF is okay. even in a limited circumstance. And that goes back to all the misunderstanding of what it really is and what it really means and how bad that. I think that in itself is enough to get rid of it. But you don't even need a statistic here. Just plot it, right? Just plot the data. And you can ask better questions. You can understand what's going on. You can forecast into the future what kind of number of failures you expect. So in this particular escalator, we're looking at 30 total failures by 10,000, about 11,000 hours or so. And if I'm tracking what the nature of these failures are, I can then maybe I plot just certain types of failures, just bearing failures. Then I can use reliability and the Weibull analysis to figure out what my spares and stocking and so on should be. But I could even just use these plots to get a much better picture of what's going on and trying to make decisions, right? Now, in one factory I had the chance to work with is they were tracking MTBF by shift. And every shift would write down on the chalkboard or on a whiteboard, showing my age there, what their MTBF was for that day. And it was tied to their uptime for their factory. So they went to great pains to try to show that MTBF was improving to the detriment of the next shift. So they would ignore failures and keep things running by hook or by crook and show either better apparent reliability or just doing baling wire and duct tape type fixes that then would cause a major downtime later on down the system. So the metric itself of trying to track your uptime and trying to track operator performance is not really a great idea in my mind. But from a maintenance point of view, what we can use that very same data for is to figure out whether our maintenance activities are working or not. We can move off of scheduled maintenance and look at predictive maintenance. We can implement fixes to our procedures so that we don't just patch, but we fix. We get to root cause and actually fix it. Changing how we look at the data helps us all interpret what's going on and get better visibility into what's really happening. So that's why I really harp on that. All right. Just a couple of ideas of how to get past using MTBF. One, just don't use it, right? Somebody asks you for an MTBF, patiently explain that it's what do you really want? What are you really looking for? And they'll probably say, I want to know how long it'll work. I want to know how long something will last. Well, what do you mean by that? Right? Do you want something to last for 2 years? Yes. Well, how many should last for 2 years? Right? Now, most people will say they want all of them. I want my pump to last for 2 years without failure. So I want 100% reliability at 2 years. Well, would you be all right if it had a 99% chance of surviving 2 years? Because we can't afford to buy one that just won't fail. And come to a conclusion as to what risks they're willing to take when you're talking about reliability. Now, this goes to the heart of people tend not to understand what they mean by MTBF. I want this pump, it has a 50,000 hour MTBF. It does not mean that it will work for 5 years. There's a 60% chance, or roughly, that it will fail by 50,000 hours. So what do you really want is probably the appropriate question here, is get past that misunderstanding element. Take the opportunity to do some education. If you have the opportunity, do a class, do an internal brown bag session, do a webinar, send people to the nomtbf.com site. Start the conversation as to what is this metric and what are we really trying to measure? And is there a better way? And then when you have the opportunity, calculate it both ways, right? If you've got some time to failure data, get a Weibull distribution and figure out what percentage are surviving 1 year, and then calculate the MTBF value. Now, which way would help you make an appropriate decision more accurately? Yeah, wear a no MTBF button. I should actually make another batch of those and take them to RAMS this year. The RAM Reliability and Maintainability Conference is in Tucson this year, and I'm presenting a tutorial and a paper. Not talking about MTBF except in the hallways, I guess, if I take a pile of buttons. But start documenting when MTBF leads you astray or leads you to make an improper decision or a bad decision, whereas reliability would give you more clarity of what's really going on and help you get to the right answer. And then where you have MTBF, with a client I was working with this last couple of weeks, is they had an MTBF value. And all I did was say, all right, you want 50,000 hours, and these numbers don't make sense to each other, but they wanted 50,000 hours for 2 years, and I had to ask how long was their product expected to be operating, and they said 2 years, and we wanted 50,000 hour MTBF. Right? You can do the calculations and figure out, well, what percentage are going to survive 2 years? And I don't know, it was sort of like 60% would survive 2 years according to their expressed MTBF target. And they said, well, that doesn't sound very good, right? Well, just because you say it in a different metric doesn't make it better. You really are still going to have about half of them fail in 2 years. And by hiding behind a metric that very few people understand doesn't really help you. So let's talk about the probability of success over duration. And if it's availability, let's talk about that instead. Yeah. Elena, I appreciate you. Hopefully share those buttons around and help other people get to it. Yeah. Now, Anastasia, I've run into that where people require MTBF. We'll give them the MTBF off of the Telcordia, but then translate it into, well, if you expect this system to work for 10 years, given this MTBF value, you should expect 3% to survive 10 years, or whatever the particular number is. The issue is that MTBF doesn't translate well with people's understanding, where as soon as you say, well, that means that 98% are going to last 2 years, now they can make a good decision as to whether that's appropriate or not. Does that make sense or not? This means that 2% of my customers are going to experience failures. Now that may be appropriate for my product line. It may not. But just saying so many hours MTBF really doesn't help anybody understand how to translate that. All right, so I think got just 1 or 2 slides here. I want to highlight, I wasn't able to find the website. I know it's behind a firewall, so I wasn't able to get a copy of it in time, but there's a company in Denmark. I ran into, one of the engineers works on a standards body that I was with for a while, and he mentioned that they made it company policy. Thou shalt not use MTBF. And they had a little crystal ball web page that said, if you really want MTBF, push the button. And it would roll up a bunch of random numbers and say, if you don't like that number, push the button again. So their attitude was MTBF, especially like this Telcordia type predictions, parts count predictions, was basically a random number and pretty useless. Dell came out with a policy that they were not going to use MTBF. It was about 5-6 years ago that I ran across that. And I've run into more and more people and more companies that are just saying no to MTBF. And I'm hearing about more all the time. But just make it policy. And if you're not able to set the policy, show how bad using MTBF is. Highlight it and document it, those kinds of things. Yeah, Rob, you're exactly right. That's why I often say, I want 99% the last 1 month, 98% the last 1 year, and 90% the last 5 years. Now I can pick out more points if you'd like, if those are important to your business goals. But by simply setting those metrics and percentages, it helps the understanding a whole lot as to what are we really talking about. I've also run into a number of component suppliers that are doing really nice white papers about the dominant failure mechanisms, IGBTs. are a key component in some designs of inverters for converting DC power to AC power, say for a solar panel. This one particular vendor listed saying if you're using it in a situation where it's going to, like in a solar panel application, you should expect the die attach to fail over time due to thermal cycling. And here's the formula, here's the calculation. Given your application and exposure and temperatures, you can calculate your own reliability curve. And likewise, if you're using it in say a vehicle operation, in say electric vehicle with the inverter in it, it's switching much more often. You should expect wire bond fracture or separation. And here's the calculations and test data that supports it. And nowhere did they mention MTBF, but they gave you enough insight into the expected failure mechanisms for your application that you could calculate reliability for any period of time that you were interested in for your environment. I'd like to see a lot more of that because it makes our work as a reliability engineer a whole lot more fruitful and accurate. It doesn't always have to be full up physics of failure type modeling. It can be based on test data or simple fitted regression curves and so on. Yet it's orders of magnitude more useful than doing it. So let me take a look at some of the questions. I see the chat window's been busy here. So Sam, I think you mentioned this earlier when we were, just before we started, was working in a brewery. And you do weekly PMs, or 2 weekly PMs. I'm not sure if that's twice a week or once every 2 weeks. But what does that do for the reliability demand? Well, simply plot your downing events, right, on the mean cumulative function plot. And if you're doing this consistently, as the lines age in between major overhauls or resetting of the lines, what is it getting better, or is it getting worse, or is it staying stable? You know, is the type of maintenance you're doing appropriate to maintain the uptime of your system? And the mean cumulative function, or that plot, the mean cumulative plot, is one way to test that. So if you did maintenance more often or less often, you could see the change in the arrival rates of the failures, of the downtimes, depending on all kinds of other factors. But just plot it, see what kind of visualization you're getting. Yeah, Norma, the comparing MTBF after the design is complete with actual performance. Yeah, you know, we should really do that more often. There's a paper by Jeff Jones, and he has a draft of that paper up on the nomtbf.com site, that they actually did the study where they had really good field data for a handful of different circuit boards. And they ran the various, like Telcordia, and there's a French parts count method for their systems, and there's a British one, and there's a Japanese one, and Chinese one, in Mill Handbook 217. And they found that the parts count prediction methods were inaccurate to minus 100% to plus 600%. So read the paper for some more details. It's pretty much confirms that the parts count prediction methodologies is pretty much a random number generator. And there's very, very limited use for parts count predictions in my mind. And if you're using it for your advertising, it's pretty much just pick your favorite number and stick it out there. It's probably as accurate. It doesn't give you any credibility in my book if you say, well, we use Telcordia. Well, whoop-dee-doo. Does it match your actual field performance? And if not, why? Why are you bothering to do parts count prediction? I don't have the link handy. I got my screen completely tied up with this packet, with this system, but if you go to the nomtbf.com site and search for Jeff Jones, and I think there's a tab for resources that lists the handful of papers I've mentioned. That'd be the easiest place to get it. Or just send me an email and I'll send it to you. All right, so we're coming right up in the end of it. Appreciate all the comments and input and so on. Let me go to my last slide here, which has the slide deck and some other links and a variety of other things. But there's, oh, and one last thing is next month, the webinar is on December 8th at 9 o'clock Pacific time. And it's for anybody that's interested in preparing for the CRE course or the CRE Certified Reliability Engineer certification from ASQ, or you have that certification and you'd like to contribute some insights to those that are preparing for the exam. Let's talk about that. And I'm also going to be offering a course that runs for about 2 months. My cat is pretty excited by it. We'll run a 2-week or 2-month course that will meet twice a week for a couple of hours each session in January and February for those that are preparing for the exam. So we'll talk about more about that next month. So I'll leave you with this: is what are you going to do today to get rid of MTBF? Hopefully I've highlighted a few things of why it's not a very good metric and given you a couple of ideas of what you can do about it. And so, and where did my comment window go? Yeah, Kirk, that's a good point. And there's also, it's called Reliability Growth, is a paper by, I'm drawing a complete blank on what organization it came up from, but I believe I have it linked in the No MTBF site where Pact and the University of the Cal's folks basically have been slamming prediction methodologies since the 70s and probably earlier. So yeah, the mill standards is probably a curse for us because they were based on standards and metrics before we had the capability to do even simple linear regression. Now you can do a Weibull analysis by hand on paper. It's not that tough. I think it's coupled with that it's quick, it's easy meaning that even managers can understand it. But over the time, it's morphed into something we don't truly understand or monitor or measure and interpret correctly. So that's the biggest reason I'm against MTBF. Yes, it does have application, which brings me to my second point. In my work in reliability engineering, I've only seen it truly appropriate once or twice. And even those you were better served by using Weibull so that you could detect a deviation from the constant failure rate. So it's plot the data, work up the calculations using reliability, or plot it on a mean cumulative function and do the regression under that. You're going to be way better served. All right, well, appreciate it, Jay, and others. I know we're right up against the end here, so I should probably drop off the recording. We'll have this posted and up on iTunes here in a day or so. Yes, David, you can calculate reliability from an MTBF value. What you need is the duration of time that you're interested in. So it's, and I don't have my cursor able to draw nice and clean, otherwise I'd draw it out for you, but look up the reliability function for the exponential distribution. It's reliability at some as a function of time equal to e raised to the negative lambda t, or time divided by MTBF, and do the natural log on both sides, and you can solve for whatever reliability you're looking for. So if it's the reliability function, and you're looking for what's the chance of surviving at a certain point in time, then it's just, you're solving for R. So it's e to the negative t divided by MTBF. So let's say, and the one I can remember is e to the negative, say, 50,000 hours, and my MTBF is 50,000 hours, e to the negative 1. It's 0.36. It means 36% chance of surviving that duration in time of 50,000 hours given an MTBF of 50,000 hours. So if I'm got a 50,000 hour MTBF and I'm trying to calculate how many will survive 1 year, say 87, 60 hours, then T equals 8760 divided by 50,000 and calculate it out. My cat agrees with me on the calculations, I guess. All right, let me drop the recording.